You ever have one of those moments where you realize the world's just not built for people like you anymore? Yeah, that was me, just last Thursday, standing in the middle of Foot Locker Emporium with my jacket. Old, threadbare, faded brown tweed, buttoned right up to the collar, and that one thing pinned to it that I swore I'd only wear on days when it meant something. You know, I'd walk through rain, dust, years and years, survive things most folks couldn't even imagine, but nothing quite prepared me for getting into it with a kid named Chad over a Purple Heart. Let me back up a sec. See, I'm John McTavish. Folks call me Mac, and I served 2 tours as a Marine in Vietnam, though nobody really wants to hear those stories now, not unless it's Memorial Day and they're feeling patriotic. Truth is, I mostly keep to myself, got a little government apartment, hit the VA clinic, take walks to keep my legs moving since that shrapnel in my hip acts up if I sit too long. The medal? Yeah, it's real. I got it dragging my sergeant out of a firefight when I was sure we'd both die in a ditch somewhere. But somehow we made it out, even if he didn't. I don't wear it to show off. Hell, most days it stays tucked in a box with some old letters and photos. But every year on the day it happened, I pin it on. Reminds me I made it, you know? Reminds me of the ones who didn't. That's how I ended up in the store, looking for shoes my feet could forgive me for. Just wanting something decent, affordable, nothing fancy. The place was all neon lights and loud music, teenagers behind the counter scrolling on their phones, barely looking up as folks shuffled by. I found a pair in my size and limped over to pay, hoping to be in and out, but Chad, the clerk, barely 20 if I'm being generous, takes one look at my jacket, or more specifically at the Purple Heart, and suddenly he's a mall cop on a power trip. He says, "Sir, company policy prohibits unauthorized insignia. That thing needs to come off now." And would you believe, the kid actually reaches for it, like he's about to flick a piece of lint off my lapel. My hand just moves, out of habit more than anything, covering that metal like I'm back in the jungle guarding my last cigarette. "This isn't a thing, son," I tell him, my voice probably coming out rougher than I intended. It was earned. But Chad's got an audience, and nothing's more dangerous than a young man with just enough authority to be stupid. He sneers, "Rules are rules, old man," then grabs the metal and rips it off, just like that, a sharp tug, a tearing sound, my jacket torn open. I just stood there, staring, my hands shaking, not with fear but a kind of white-hot anger I hadn't felt in decades. Folks stopped to watch, but nobody said a word, nobody stepped in. Chad tossed the metal on the counter like it was nothing, like it was a cheap button from a parade. You know what I mean? You get old and suddenly you're invisible, until you become someone's target practice for a little bit of retail authority. My mind screamed at me to do something, but discipline's a hard habit to break. So instead, I just picked up the metal, held it for a second, and walked out. Left the shoes, left the store, didn't look back. Out in the mall, I found a bench and just sat there, feeling every year I'd lived, every friend I'd lost, every day I'd gotten up wishing the world made a little more sense. My first thought was to call the police, report the assault, the theft, the disrespect. But what were they going to do, lecture a punk kid on manners? No, what I really needed was someone who'd get it, someone who'd look at that metal and know exactly what it meant. That someone was my son, David. David, Colonel David McTavish, stationed at Fort Hamilton. We don't talk as much as we should, 2 stubborn McTavish men who never figured out how to say the important stuff. But blood is blood, and I knew he'd understand. I called, voice trembling a little, and when he picked up, all business, all military discipline, I just let it spill out. Told him what happened, every detail. There was this long pause. He didn't need me to explain why it mattered. He already knew. "Which mall?" he asked. "Are you still there?" "Northwood Mall," I said, "just outside Foot Locker." "Stay put," he said, voice turning to steel. "I'm coming, and I'm not coming alone." Then he hung up. 15 minutes later, maybe less, the doors of Foot Locker flew open like a scene out of a movie. David came in, full dress uniform, all ribbons and polished brass, flanked by 2 master sergeants who looked like they could eat a kid like Chad for breakfast. They didn't just walk, they marched, boots echoing on the tile, shoppers parting like the Red Sea. The music stopped, the chatter died, and suddenly it was just them and Chad, who looked up and realized he was in way over his head. David didn't yell, didn't have to. He just stared at Chad, then said, "You assaulted my father and removed a United States military decoration from his person. That's not just disrespect. That's an insult to every man and woman who's worn the uniform. The store manager tried to bluster in. Sir, there must be some mistake. I had no idea, but David just shut him down with a glare. There is no mistake, he said. Your employee committed an act of assault and profound disrespect. Now, he's going to apologize to my father. And I'll tell you, Chad looked ready to pass out. He squeaked out, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know. I was wrong. But David just waited until Chad looked me in the eye, and for the first time, maybe ever, the apology sounded real, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. David turned to the manager. Henderson was his name, sweating bullets, and said, My father came in here for a pair of shoes. I trust they'll be complimentary, along with a lifetime discount. Henderson nodded so hard I thought his head would fall off. You'd think that would be the end, but here's the twist. Corporate got wind of what happened, and Chad was out of a job by sundown. Foot Locker Emporium put out a public apology, started a whole training program about respect for veterans, and even threw in a stack of free shoes for me. My son took me to the best steakhouse in town that night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the world still had a place for people who remembered what those medals really meant. As we left, David said, Dad, you should never have had to go through that. That medal, it means something. I nodded, couldn't quite speak. He just put his hand on my shoulder and said, Some lines you don't let anybody cross, especially not when it comes to family or honor. Word got around, first at the VFW, then online. Folks called it the day some punk kid learned a hard lesson about respect, about the kind of pride you can't buy or fake. And it stuck with me. Sometimes you don't need an army to stand up for what's right. Just someone who remembers, someone willing to walk into the storm and say, Not today. So, yeah, maybe the world's changed. Maybe old soldiers don't fit in the way we used to. But there are still lines you don't cross, and still folks willing to defend them. You ever see someone wearing a medal like that? Maybe stop and remember. It's not a decoration. It's a story, a memory, a piece of someone's soul. And if you've got a take on respect, family, or what it means to stand up for what's right, I want to hear it. Where do you draw your line? Because at the end of the day, the only thing standing between a moment of disrespect and a lifetime of regret is someone who says, That's enough. You know what I mean?